So I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone here this evening. First item is approval of the agenda. I would like to add under approval I want to hear from you what you think about requiring masks. So that's the only change that I have. Anybody else? Motion?
I'll make a motion we approve the agenda.
Second. Okay.
So I
Thank you.
needed it approved as amended?
As
please?
amended.
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Motion carries. Okay. The other night we started having a discussion at the Wake County Mayors Association at the request of the county as to whether or not we would require the wearing of masks within our community. So far, 2 communities have required it, City of Raleigh and Knightdale. I assume the others are discussing it. There was no real conclusion as to, from the others, as whether they really wanted to do it or not. We're getting inquiries from, well, we got it from REL and WTVD. I think Joe got it from REL and I got it from TVD, and I just responded that I had not had a chance to consult with you yet. So I'd like to hear what you think about mandatory masks. I will tell you what Raleigh has done is made it mandatory in public and private spaces where you cannot social distance or you are not social distancing. The mayor said that they're not going to do any arrests. They're just going to try to educate people about it. I don't know. My concern is that enforcement could be a problem. I really understand that. I think they're taking the soft approach. If that doesn't work, then they may step it up. That's me talking, not them. I don't know what they're going to do. But before I make a decision, and I will tell you it is the mayor's decision on declaring an emergency, so I'm just asking for your input as to what you think. So I'll start with Larry and see what you think.
Well, I work downtown Raleigh, so 4 p.m. Friday I have to wear it. Plus, as an NC State employee, July 1st, we have to wear it all the time unless we're in a private office. So some of us are going to be impacted one way or the other.
Right.
I don't think the mask hurts. I think it's extra protection, but I agree enforcement is going to be difficult, and maybe education is the way to start off.
Okay, let me be real clear. That's the way they're going to enforce it. They're not going. If somebody doesn't have a mask on at this point, as I understand it, they're just going to talk to them. They're not going to arrest them or fine them or anything of that nature. So yeah, I get it, but I wanted to be real clear.
And Knightdale, I guess the same approach.
I would assume. I haven't seen Knightdale's approach. Now, Mary Ann and Jane Robson, neither one were at that meeting. They were there virtually, but they did not attend in person. So I haven't seen what Knightdale adopted. I would assume it's probably the same, or similar, if not the same. So, let me just say before I move on, I'm sorry. I believe in wearing masks. I think it's a good thing. Again, I have an enforcement thing, but Annie?
I think we should. And I know I saw it on the news this afternoon. I was telling Larry in Raleigh, they had said that people should start wearing them. So
yeah.
I don't have any problem wearing it myself.
Okay. Beth?
I wear my mask when I'm not wearing it here, but
Right.
when I go out
Right.
in stores or anywhere, I have mine. So
Right.
I think it might be I think people are going to not be real happy if we say it's mandatory. They're going to.
You're going to hear it both ways.
Yeah. So I mean, just I think it's the only way we're going to get rid of this stuff is to really take that seriously.
Okay. Shannon?
I don't love requiring it. Recommending, I am behind But, and that said, I wear a mask when I feel it's appropriate. However, requiring it, I have just a little bit of an issue with. I understand that we might not be enforcing it, but I would rather see a recommendation to wear.
Okay. Glenn?
Where there is no social distancing, I feel people should wear a mask. Places where you don't need social distancing, I would go with more of just recommending a mask and educating folks.
Well, let me explain that what Raleigh did, it said was, if you were not or could not social distance, you had to wear a mask. So what that implies that if you can, you don't have to. That's the way theirs reads, and it's in a newspaper article that I actually have on my phone, so I wanted to be sure I was describing it. What I'm hearing is 3, maybe 4 are in favor of it. Shannon's not, you're for recommending it, not mandating it. Is that fair? Is that fair with everybody else? Beverly? Mm-hmm. It's fair. I'm waiting to hear from you. Do you think it's...
I think, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just double checking. So Glenn, you seemed...
I'm saying where there is no social distancing, recommend a mask. And if it's...
Recommend or making it mandatory? I mean, that's the question, folks. So we got 3 that say yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank y'all. I know it's quick to hit you with that, but I need to be in a position to go ahead and make a decision. We'll work on it. So thank you. I appreciate it. Is anything else on that from anyone? Okay, thank you. Okay, Joe?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the board. Tonight is your second budget work session for the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Real brief repeat of the overview of these work sessions and the budget in general. The budget's a tool to accomplish town goals. Those goals are identified in your Zebulon 2030 strategic plan. And the budget message, regardless of the budget year, links the budget features to the goals. I won't go into the detail that I went into in the last work session, but just the goals and features that predicated the Zebulon 2030 strategic plan is a recognition that Zebulon is changing both in population growth and diversification, the land use, specifically farmland changing to residential subdivisions, and the basis of the economy going from mass production manufacturing to more niche manufacturing and more retail stores. And therefore, our service has to change to meet those changing needs. And the question is, will we have the capacity or the volume to meet that change? And will we have the capability or the means to adapt to meet that change? So the Zebulon 2030 strove to find the answer to that question, which was, what is the ideal Zebulon? Meaning, the 2 questions put to the citizens was, what do you like about Zebulon that you don't want to see change? And what would you like to see different in a future Zebulon? And so 3 focus areas emerged on the areas to focus upon, and those were to grow smart, preserve and protect small town life, and have a vibrant downtown. Within each of those focus areas, there was goals, and then there was associated tasks. The tasks can change while the goals don't, Example of that is what you went through at your this year's retreat in Rocky Mount. Tonight's presentations are going to focus chiefly on the Grow Smart focus area. The goals, once again, of that focus area are to support expected service levels and to partner on economic development. Your number one or your first work session focused a lot on economic development. Tonight's presentations are going to focus more on supporting expected levels of service. So the budget features that you'll hear about tonight will give you a presentation on information technology. There's a picture of one of our firefighters using the new card access system to the fire station. We're looking to expand that program as an example of an information technology project. You'll hear two presentations from public safety regarding hiring of police officers as well as adding duties of fire investigation. There's an example, or there's a picture of our Cops Incarnations program. They'll have a presentation on streets and thoroughfares. You'll see in this budget projects that repave streets as well as improve signalized intersections. And then we'll follow up with a presentation on the fleet. Those are pictures of two of your most expensive pieces of equipment. That ladder truck in the background is about $1.2 million, and the engine in the foreground is close to $750,000. So I'll follow up on that, and then I will pause my presentation to allow the information technology group to step forward and make their presentation. With that, I'll recognize Lisa Markland.
Good evening. The IT committee is made up of Chris Perry, myself, and formerly Captain Dennis Brannon. And we have an overview. We're going to talk about the background of what we have done in the past and how we're getting to where we are today. The update for what we've done this fiscal year, what we're recommending, and then the future projects. In the background, in October 2016, we brought in a group from the School of Government and the IT directors across Wake County, and they came in and did an assessment of our information technology infrastructure. And they went to every department, they touched just about every computer, went to every server room, and they looked at everything that we had. And at the retreat in 2017, Shannon Tufts with the School of Government and Erica Sacco, the IT director in Apex, came and they updated the board on the assessment that was done. And their main recommendation to us was that we needed an IT person on staff to handle the issues that we had coming across the town and the way that we were growing to keep up with the ever-changing technology. So in the last 4 years, we have made requests and we haven't gotten the position to date. So we started with a committee of 3 with Dennis, Chris, and I, and it became evident that we just weren't able to keep up with the changes that were happening in the technology world. So we contracted with CII Technology over the last 2 years, and they have done a great deal to help us stay abreast of the changes. But we also found that getting immediate help for issues that we might have had wasn't happening as quickly as we liked. So in this last budget year, we did get an IT specialist who was just recently hired. So to update where we have done, what we have done this year, we completed phase 3 of the radio replacement, which was phase 2 for the police department. Phase 1 was the fire department. We had 2 phases for the police department, so that has been completed. We updated the sound system in this room, including microphones and speakers. We have replaced just about every computer that the town owns to get us up to date and on a Windows 10 platform. We upgraded to Office 365, and like I said, we hired an IT specialist that started about 2 months ago. The goals of our recommendations are to address safety, which is reducing the vulnerabilities that we have in our system and across town, and not just when it comes to computers, but also dealing with IT as it relates to safety and vulnerability in our facilities, like the entrance system that we'll get to in just a few moments. Efficiency, how we can use technology more efficiently and to do our jobs more effectively. And also to address the goals of 2030 strategic plan. And just about everything that we're recommending falls under the Growing Smart goal for the town. The first recommendation is the card access system, and I'm going to have Chris Perry come in and talk about that since they already have that at their facility.
Good evening. So Lisa mentioned one of our goals of the IT committee was looking at safety. A couple years ago, a vulnerability assessment, I'll try not to say that very fast, was done to look at two items. One, primarily the safety of our employees. Should an emergency occur, could we make sure our employees were secure and safe in their workplace? And the second part of that is not quite as important, but important in its own right, is the safety of our property that the town owns and making sure it is secured. So one of the projects that came out of that was access control for the fire department. The way we leave in a hurry, come back, and then a lot of times don't have time to go around and lock all the doors and type thing. We needed something that was more of an automated system. So we installed a access control system at the fire department. You saw a picture just a few minutes ago of one of our firefighters entering the door. And it has been worked very, very well at securing our building and really just controlling who comes and when they go. It was very common at the fire station for people, you look up and there's someone there that you had no idea, because you'd either walk into the building and come in through the bays. Pretty much any hour of the day that doors were unlocked. 10 o'clock at night, the guys would be at the station and you'd look up and there'd be someone standing there. So we felt that was the best way, and it has worked very, very well. As a committee, we've looked at the success of that and looked at how our other buildings could benefit from a system very similar. So we identified that Town Hall would be the next priority, and that's what you see in the recommended project for FY21, is to extend some type of access control system for Town Hall, and that would enable us to secure the perimeter as well as the individual suites. So, for example, the perimeter could be unlocked for visitors to come and go, but they may or may not be able to go into the suites without someone granting them access to do that. And then if an emergency situation occurred, the building could be locked down very quickly, such as an active shooter type situation or something similar to that. So our committee has already looking at future facilities, so you will see in upcoming plans to try to extend that functionality to some of the other buildings. But we felt it best not to try to do it all in one big fell swoop, just do it kind of in a phased approach based on priority. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Lisa for the next part.
The work order system that is the next item listed is helping us hopefully to complete our tasks much more efficiently and effectively. It was an original request from the Parks and Recreation Department, but it was also something that the new IT specialist and I talked about and having a need for, so that we could track the work that was being done and requested in the IT department. And it would help us to see trends, were there issues happening repeatedly in a specific department or something along those lines. Parks and Recreation wanted to be able to schedule work that could be done, as well as keeping track of work that has been done, so that they too could track trends and were there issues happening at specific parks or things that needed to be done. So this came up, and the nice feature about this is that it is expandable. We're recommending using it in IT and Parks and Recreation first, but it can be expanded to all the departments to be used as it works best. Public Works comes to mind first and foremost, just because they have so many work orders and things that they do on a regular basis. So that is the recommendation for the work order system. The next system is a billing module system that we want to add to the current finance system, and that again will be dealing with efficiency and consistency of billing and things like that. I'm going to have Chris Perry talk about that as well, because that's one of the things that came from his department.
So like Lisa said, the billing module kind of relates to that efficiency part of our goals. And the best way I think I can illustrate the need here is to kind of tell you what we do today. And what I'm describing would apply to the fire department, because we do quite a bit of invoicing for fire inspections, for permitting, such as that. But Parks and Rec, Police, Public Works, Planning, each department does some type of invoicing to various customers. When that occurs, those invoices are generated within the department. We generate the invoices, we create them, if you will, we deliver them to the customer, whoever that may be, and then we take that invoice and we send it to the finance department, who tracks payment. So that invoice has to be re-entered from the originating department system. Then it's re-entered again into the finance system. And as each customer, whether they pay on time or they pay late or whatever they do, that is tracked within finance. And then once it is settled, that account is settled, then that invoice is then forwarded back to the original department, and they go back into their records management system and mark that the bill has been paid, which is cumbersome is probably the word that comes to my mind. And we do a lot of invoicing in the fire department, so that's kind of why I guess I'm up here tonight talking about it. But what you see here, this module of the finance system basically takes that whole process and makes it very efficient, very seamless. So to take the exact example, one of our staff would key the invoice directly into the billing module of finance system. So the finance staff already sees it, and then it generates the invoice that a person could choose to write a check and turn it in or mail it in, or they can pay directly from that online from that invoice. There's no duplicate entry at finance. That all happens within there. And then our staff would simply just get a report, monthly, quarterly, or ad hoc, to show which bills have been paid. So it eliminates a lot of that back and forth. It eliminates a lot of that the double entry that we have today, and it automates the process to make it much more efficient for the customer. I think that's a big part. We get a lot of requests, especially we deal with like out of state or at least out of the area people. Maybe they're requesting permits. A good example this time of year is fireworks tents. Those are not local people. They're from other states or what have you coming in, and they'll want us to issue them an invoice so they can pay those permit fees, and it's not convenient for them to stop by town hall to pay them. So we've gotten a really big desire from them for something that was more online based, and this module will take care of that as well. So.
The next thing that was requested is IDT plans and Bluebeam program, and I'm going to have Mike Clark talk about this because this is a big planning project that we're doing.
Good evening. The IDT plans and Bluebeam programs is an interactive online module that allows for full comprehensive plan reviews at all of the different stages, from the initial submittal to the signature set for construction drawings. The way our process works right now is applicants will submit between 7 to 9 sets of plans. And I'm sure you've all seen these sets of plans. When they're rolled up, they're approximately this big, and they cover Meade's office right now. Each of those plans we review to make sure that all of the necessary pages are there, and then we distribute to each of the members of the TRC. Sometimes that includes running them up to Raleigh for the City of Raleigh Public Utilities Department or CorpHUD. Sometimes it's running them to Wake County. Sometimes it's running those up to the NCDOT Engineers Division Office. At each of those locations, as well as our internal staff for TRC, which is each of the different departments, the individual reviewers will go through, mark up the plans, take notes on a separate sheet of paper, and then when they're done with the review, they'll congregate each of those review comments, some on the plan, some otherwise, and then currently they'll email Meade Bradshaw all of those comments. He then goes through, reviews each of those comments, takes out duplications. If there if there's clarification that needs to be made, he contacts those individual reviewers, and then he puts those into a form letter. Then that is sent to the applicant. The applicant reviews the form letter, then goes back and looks at the plan set, trying to match, okay, this comment's on this page and it's dealing with this section or this street, which means that our comments need to have some sort of geographic reference in accordance with where it is in the subdivision. They do their best to interpret our comments, and then we all gather for a TRC meeting to discuss these comments. This process actually is repeated multiple times. We have one subdivision that has gone through 5 different reviews of that cycle. We have another one that just hit their 4th review of that cycle. The proposed software will congregate all of those into an online platform. Instead of the developers providing all of these different sets of plans, they upload PDFs directly into the IDT program. We'll have either planning technician or a planner go through review, make sure, okay, all the necessary boxes are checked. It also allows for the application to be filled out directly into the program. They will then distribute those electronically to each of our TRC members, including those that are off-site, such as the City of Raleigh, NCDOT, and Wake County. And then the nice part about this is everybody effectively works off of one set. So comments that I make or that me, Bradshaw, makes, Joe will be able to see them, Chris Ray will be able to see them, the NCDOT engineer will be able to see them in real time as we're working on these comments. One, that eliminates duplication of comments. 2, these comments are made directly onto the individual sheets. So we can put bubbles with notations, lines, boxes throughout the entire process. Additionally, every time we make a mark on those sheets, it congregates those into a separate checklist that the developer then will go through, and he'll actually have to respond to each of these comments on the checklist. 1, it confirms that he understands the comment, and 2, it helps us to know that he's actually been able to go through and address it. The other part about this program is not only does it congregate all of those comments, but also it congregates all of the different review cycles. As I mentioned, that we had a subdivision that went through 5 different reviews. This will congregate all of the review sets into one folder, which will be fully accessible online, regardless if we're here at Town Hall or if we're working remotely. This provides an advantage because then if there's a question about something on review set number 1 and we're on review set number 5, it allows us to quickly go back and efficiently determine, yes, we made this comment in 1, it was corrected in 2, but for some reason it's showing back up on 5. The other component this does is allows plans to overlay on each other and highlights deviations. So if there's, let's say, a sidewalk or a curb line that is moved, it'll show up and actually highlight on the review page so we can cross-check to make sure that the developers and applicants have actually made these modifications. Finally, this development software is something that our developers are currently used to using. It is currently in operation in Cary and Apex and Wake Forest and has just recently been introduced in full effect for the town of Knightdale. So this is not something unusual for the development community. Additionally, a lot of our review partners are also familiar with this review software package. Effectively, it provides efficiency for not only the staff, but also the development community because it allows for our staff to review things in real time as a group. Additionally, it allows for the developers to have an understanding of the entire history of all the review cycles.
Finally, these are the future IT projects that you'll see coming up, which Chris touched on, the card access system at the police station, community center, addition of modules for the work order system, the final upgrade to this chambers, which is the projection system, and then computer replacements will happen every 3 to 5 years. So do you have any questions, or is there anything else we can help you with?
I had a question on the access card. I understand what an access card is, but what were you thinking like the front doors, people could just come in when we're open, is that it? But like the back door or the individual suites would have access cards, or?
That would be
How
correct.
far-reaching is that? That's what I don't understand.
The side door to this facility would stay open as it is now. The front doors and back doors would be kept locked, and you could use a card access there. And then the suites would all have card access.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
This actually may be more for somebody else, but do we know how many invoices we prepare a year? And then as far as the form of payment, what is checks versus credit card?
That would be a finance question.
Okay.
There are various different payment methods now. For the most part, it's checks probably for fire inspections. I want to say, Chris, as far as fire inspections go, there's maybe 100 a year, roughly, I'm thinking. That's just that. And then there's other stuff. We do beer and wine license annually. Things like that is what it'll be used for. Does that answer?
Yeah, and do we accept credit card payments online?
We do.
They have a link you can go to?
We do, yeah.
Would you say it's roughly 50-50?
Right now, it's probably more checks.
More checks yet?
Yeah, because we haven't totally broadcast or made the link live. But let's say, like Chris mentioned, an out-of-state customer wanting to pay online, then we kind of like email them the link to pay. That's kind of how we've been doing it. And that's popular with out-of-town people.
And most of the parties pay within 30 days, or do you spend a lot of time tracking, following up with vendors?
That's kind of a chore, tracking, because the way we do now is we have them in a paper folder. It's kind of an old school way of doing it. And there are some that are past due that I guess at a certain point we pass it along to town attorney to try collection procedures that way.
And then do we charge a late fee or interest?
We don't.
That sometimes helps payments happen within 30 days.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Not for you, though, Bobby. Thank you. I understand how the card access would work for the police department and for the fire department, for town hall. But on here it says that the card access would be used for the community center as well. Does this mean that we are thinking that somehow the community at large is going to be having these cards in some capacity? Explain what that means.
No, ma'am, we have not gotten into looking at how it would function at the community center, but it is something that we would want to look at in the future, and we would get the consultant to sit down and talk with us about what would be the best way to use that, but the public would not have cards to enter the facility.
Oh,
No,
okay.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If not, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. Tonight, we'd like to sit and talk to you a little bit about streets and thoroughfares and its impact on the capital budget. As with all the CIP items that we're talking about tonight, we want to tie those goals back to your 2030 strategic goals. The items that we're going to talk about tonight, I think best fit in the category of growing smart. We'll be talking about street paving, roadway widening, and intersection signalization. One of the things we want you to kind of remember as we go through the presentation tonight, is this addressing a current need of yours? Is it preventing a future need? Are there other alternatives? Some of you may recall were on the board at the time. Back in 2016, we did a street paving analysis. This is a copy of the book that went through and done a comprehensive review of all our street paving, kind of looked at how we grade streets. You may recall, some of you, the presentation where we had the 57 Chevy with the car with a deteriorating paint. It talked about a pavement curve as the years got out, closer to 12, 14, that the acceleration of depreciation or deterioration on that street accelerated, and we want a lot of times look at doing preservation techniques sooner than waiting to mill and pave. Give you a little bit of background how we grade streets and how we come up to a recommendation for you for street paving. Each year, our construction inspector, Mr. Jason Brown, completes a street survey. That street survey is conducted on a scale of 1 to 100. We look at each street block by block, and we base that condition assessment based on the number of potholes. Is there rutting? Is there cracking? Is there longitudinal cracking? Is there latitudinal cracking? Is there alligator cracking? Is there ride quality? We got polished aggregate. So we look through a weighted system to score each street. So of course that report is available to you, but we go through each town street, all 25 miles of town street, and put a grade on each street. Give you an idea where we landed. Jason completed the report basically end of December, 1st of January of this year. 52% of our streets graded excellent. What is excellent? That means it's a score of 95 to 100. 10.5% of our streets graded good. All right, the score for that is 90 to 94. 21.7% graded fair. That's a score of 89 to 93. Excuse me, to 90, 89. And then we've had moderate streets at 6.8%, which are 70 to 79, and then poor is less than 69. Basically, from that, we are able to generate a pavement condition index, or a PCI. You'll hear us talk about PCI. What is the overall rating score to town streets? Taking a look at all the miles, taking a look at the condition score and stuff that Jason has generated. We have a PCI rating of 90.8. Where does that fall? That falls right in overall, as we have, from an overall standpoint, we have good street system, which we're all proud of and want to have a good street system. I know. Back in 2016, when we done this report with Volker, just to give you some rationale, we had an 87.7. So we are showing some improvement. Now we got to take that improvement with a little bit of grain of salt. We are adding a significant amount of streets. In the last 3 years, we've added over 5 miles of street. When the divisions dedicate streets, they come in at 100. So that's skewing our ratio a little bit, but you know, it's still good to have that rating of 90.8. One of the things that came out of the report in 2016 is Volker recommending us to try to invest $300,000 annually. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to that point, and the goal of that is, and you can see the star here that's on the pavement strategy options that we reviewed, was to eliminate some of the poor streets. Currently, we have been budgeting $150,000 annually, kind of putting it in the first year, putting it in a reserve, the following year rolling it into a paving cycle. We do that for a couple of reasons. First and foremost is we want a bigger project to try to attract more contractors. Secondly, the bigger the project is, we'll get better unit prices, we hope. So we try to save those up and do that, you know, every 2 years. We're coming up on paving this year. Something to think about and keep in mind, in 2013, we had 2.4% of our streets were graded poor, which is a grade of 69 or less. In 2020, the reporting cycle we just completed, is risen to 8.8%. So that's a little bit alarming to us. I want you to be aware of that, especially with the growth of new streets. We're still seeing an increase in poor streets. In this year's budget, the Streets and Thoroughfare Committee recommended a $500,000 investment in the streets. That would reduce our poor streets to 4%. The budget is recommending $300,000, which will drop our poor streets to 5.92%. This is the area where we talk about what streets are we looking at. Something to keep in mind, there's two types of paving programs that we have used in the past with the town of Zebulon. There's a preservation process, which we try to come in at streets around 7 to 10 years and do some crack sealing, do some slurry seals or cape seals, or the more traditional mill and pave. This year, because of the number of poor streets we have, we are recommending the traditional method of mill and pave. One of the things before we get into which streets we're looking at paving and potential cost of those is one to keep in mind, streets with curb and gutter will need to be milled. We can't let that asphalt level rise up and interfere with the gutter flow of water. Streets that do not have curb and gutter will be resurfaced. Now, currently, before we go in and put new asphalt on any one of these streets, we're going to make spot repairs. We're going to fix anything that is settled. We're going to think something that is significantly heavily alligator cracked or got separation in them, because if we don't, that asphalt will reflect that stuff back to the new asphalt. So we'll make those spot repairs, bring those up to standards, and then do the overlay on top of that. The areas that we're looking at this year, if we were granted a budget of approximately $500,000 to pave, is the 100 block of East Vance Street, East and North Lee Street, West Lee Street, West Sycamore Street. I won't go through all of these, but you can see the potential cost of each one we've estimated and the score that it associated with it based on Jason's rating of all those 13 conditions. Next item, we worked on this project a little bit this year. I want to give you an update where we stand. After the tornado went through and everything settled back down, we worked with Volkert and went and met NCDOT about the North Arundel and Green Pace Signal Project. One of the things we asked them for permission to put in on their state roads a signal. They asked us, and before we begin that, even though it met warrant analysis and met many of their requirements to put a signal in, they wanted us to review the intersection of Riley Hill Road, Proctor Street, Green Pace, and how that all interconnected. So they asked us to do and complete a traffic analysis report. We completed that. It's been submitted to NCDOT just on June 10th. They came back with 3 questions. The consultant is reviewing those questions. We'll be updating those. Our report that was submitted did recommend going ahead and putting the signal in at Green Pace and Arundel. So it's consistent with what we thought was the problem. The study evaluated it and recommended what our original concern was. So right now we hope to get in the next month, 6 weeks, some follow-up from DOT and get the permission to move forward. So what we've done in this year's budget is recommend a project of $255,000 to basically install, do to complete the design and installation of signals at Green Pace and Arundel. One thing to remember is we're only looking to put turn lanes at this time on Arundel Avenue. The image you have there is the ultimate build-out long-term. But what we're looking to do at this time is just turn lanes on Arundel Avenue and signals. There'll be no turn lanes on Green Pace. That's what our report's recommending, and that's what our budget reflects. The next project we worked on this year is also the Shepherd School Road and Old Bund. This project was probably a little step behind the Green Pace and Arundel. No warrant analysis had been completed. No preliminary work had been done that we could take advantage of and go directly to NCDOT. So we took the same approach. We sat down and met with NCDOT and asked them what their requirements were to put a traffic signal at this intersection. They came back with first complete us a warrant analysis. We did complete the warrant analysis and got the blessing of NCDOT to install a traffic signal at this location. What we're trying to do with this project is put it in a little bit of a phased approach. We're asking for this year's budget $140,000 additional, which is including a rollover of $23,000 to begin the design and permitting, surveying, geotech, easement plat. Because of this intersection, we're going to have to do some right-of-way acquisition. We're recommending hiring a right-of-way agent to complete the appraisals. We incorporated some attorney fees and et cetera. And so this next year, we'd like to get design approved, easement right-of-way secured, and get ready to go to construction in the following year. The estimated construction at this time for fiscal year 2022 is $304,000. One of the things I do want to bring your attention to is the corner there where High's Used Cars is. This potential with the installation of the signal and the turn lanes. On this project, currently there's going to be turn lanes on Shepherd School Road and on Proctor and Pierce's. So we'll be putting turn lanes on all 4 intersections. But the highest car lot use could be the most impacted by this, and it potentially could have an adverse effect on the appraisal costs and numbers we have here. But just wanted to give us a warning. We won't know further until we get more involved into the process.
The red lines are the easements, right?
Yeah, that's the right of way. The green line is where we're looking to, if I remember correctly. Red line, yes, is where we're looking to ultimately move the right of way to. Yes, ma'am, you're
Okay.
correct. And then I will say that is a high-level review at this point in time. We have not got in. That's part of the report we've done the previous year, looking at that Old Bund corridor, looking at some estimates. They've actually put them out there where they'd like to have them, not necessarily where we can put them at. So we feel like that's the worst case, and hopefully we can compress those as we move forward. Oh, let's go back one, I'm sorry. The next project is the piece we talked about, some roadway widening. We have been working on this project since 2016 to widen North Arundel Avenue. We are in the right-of-way phase. We've got permissions from NCDOT to begin securing right-of-way. Through our right-of-way agent, we have already secured 3 properties. What we're running into is we need additional funding for appraisals, purchase of that right-of-way or easements, whether it's temporary or permanent. Some of them are permanent drainage easements, so we need $100,000 to help us to purchase and secure those easements and complete appraisals for those who want appraisals. NCDOT requires us to offer appraisals to all the people out there we're seeking property from. They can waive that, or they can request that appraisal, and we're responsible for paying for it. Like I said, we've secured 3 to date. Those are Eddings Oil, Gay Family Partnership, which is the dash-in, and Old Heritage Builders, which is Sheets. So we have 13 additional properties that need to be required, whether temporary, permanent drainage easement, or right-of-way. Of this $100,000 that we're requesting for, 50% of that can be reimbursed by Campo through a Campo modification agreement. The additional $20,000 is if we need to redevelop or redo some of the plans because of the development that might be going at Wilco S. So we put some funds in there where we might have to go back and change our plans and modify them for some work that a developer would be doing. And kind of wrapping up here, I guess as we all know, growth is here. It will continue to increase. We have seen very little slowdown in the construction in the field for infrastructure. Mike's seen a little bit of slowdown for permitting, but as far as plans coming in for being reviewed and stuff, we have not seen any slowdown. So growth is here and will continue. Traffic congestion, unfortunately, will increase. But one of the good sides, I guess, coming out of the traffic impact fee that y'all have put in place is helping us fund some of these improvements that are off-site. To date, I think we've collected over $500,000 in transportation impact fees that are going to help fund these projects. With that being said, I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Question? I have a couple, Chris.
Yes, sir.
You show under biennial street paving, the budget recommendation is $300,000, and then the next page, the expenditure cost is at $500,000. Explain the difference. The difference there, as a committee, we recommended $500,000. Joe, as he went through his budget process, was unable to afford the $500,000, and so he's recommended $300,000 to be funded. If you go with Joe's recommendation, we'll take this list and pare it down and look at the grading on the street, traffic on the street and stuff, but we wanted to give you at least a complete list of the streets that we're looking at. Okay, it didn't say you're gonna pare it down.
Yeah, I agree, yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way we used to do it. We took the list, we had so much money, we could drop down the list.
And that's because we're going with a traditional mill and resurfacing this year. That is falling into exactly what we've done historically over the years. So that gives you the list of the streets. And prior, we used to, the grading maybe would come afterwards. We got the grading in ahead of you. So we wanted to let you at least look and know where we're considering paving at.
The next question, I think I know the answer to it, but I want to be sure that I'm right.
Yes, sir.
With regards to North of Rendell and Green Page Signal, is DOT participating at all?
No, sir. They have agreed to, if we construct it, they will maintain it.
They will.
Maintain it. But as far as the construction of the project, no, sir, they're not participating.
Okay. Is that their new position, that municipal governments are responsible for all signal installations?
They clearly are struggling to find funds and come up with projects. Every time I go, yes, sir, that's the problem is they're asking us to fund it and they're not willing to participate.
Well, the reason I'm asking that is that, you know, heretofore, we've never had to pay for traffic studies.
Yeah.
They did. And is that something that is going to be that way from here on out?
I think so.
Once they get across that bridge, I think they're going to stay there.
Yeah. I think you're going to see that more and more. Now, as we continue to go through this design process, there's occasionally some spot funding that might come available, and we'll continue to explore that. But at this point in time, when I speak with Tracy Parrott and those guys in the traffic division, they said they have no funding available. They're really strapped.
Well, I know they went overboard. They went way over, you know, 700 and something million,
and that's
poor management in my opinion. But having said that, I know that they're struggling for money. So I assume the same thing, that there's no help with Shepherd School and Bunn.
from DOT. That is correct.
I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Okay, I'm going to take just a few minutes tonight to talk to you about our request for fire investigation program and to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and what we're asking to do. To give you just a little bit of framework of fire investigation, fire cause and origin, state statute authorizes very specifically who can investigate the causes of fires, and then it goes one step further and says that whenever a fire occurs that there must be an investigation and a report must be filed. So as you see on the slide, it lists 3 agencies, and I guess you could consider a contingency. The State Bureau of Investigation, the North Carolina Office of State Fire Marshal, and then the Chief of the Fire Department. The contingency is if there is no fire department chief, then that rolls over to the police chief. So the short version of that is that it resides with the town. This is one of those state mandates that comes down to it. And it also extends into the county areas that we serve as well. The county has a little bit additional responsibility than what you see here, but this general statute references the municipality requirements. And similarly, our town ordinance requires the fire chief to investigate either directly, either by delegating it to someone else to take care of that investigation. And then it further requires the fire chief that if a fire is determined to be of a criminal origin, to notify and aid in the prosecution through the law enforcement agency. So that's why we do what we do, and I'll go just a little further to tell you how we go about doing it. So, since about the mid-1980s, the Wake County Fire Marshal's Office has provided fire investigations to much of Wake County, primarily the unincorporated areas. And that's because they were, one, staffed to do that task, and secondly, they were equipped. They can provide assistance within those municipal areas when requested, which is a good part to know when we look at the law and what it requires an investigation of every fire. So the overheated car on the side of the road, to the little grass fire, to a large structure. Every fire's cause has to be determined. Most of the time, that is done within our department. Our personnel, all of our personnel have some really basic cause and origin training. Some of our personnel have advanced cause and origin training. But we use the county when it's either a large loss fire or a large loss, probably a good example, or like a difficult case for whatever reason. Maybe it's very intricate or very involved. So that's what we've done historically. Recently, what we've seen is there's been some changes in the county's fire marshal's office affecting the investigations that they've done. We've had a couple, just as an example, we've had a couple of examples where our personnel were there, and our personnel had higher levels of training than the person that the county may have sent to do the investigation. And that's given us a cause to look at within our own organization. We've identified that we have some resources, we have some staff abilities to conduct fire investigations. And we've started doing some investigations to reduce our dependency on the county, but we're unable to kind of take it all over, and that's exactly what the request that you see here tonight involves. The proposal that we've asked for in the budget this year is to implement the full ability to conduct fire investigations within the corporate limits of town, and to implement that over a 2-year period. So what does it take for us to do that? Staff training, staff certification. Again, we've got some staff already that are certified to do cause and origin investigation with many, many years of experience. So that gives us a very good base to build off of. We would in turn train additional persons. Our goal would be to have one person on each shift that is trained at least a basic level when it comes to cause and origin investigations. Also in that program, when these people achieve a identified level of certification and ability to provide this, we've included some compensation as we'll be adding duties and responsibilities to their job descriptions. And the last piece is the investigation equipment, which consists primarily of personal protective equipment that is different from what we wear on a given fire scene, cameras, excavation equipment, evidence collection equipment, and that type of thing. So to give you a dollar amount, when you look at this right here, in reviewing this, I realize that's probably something I should have included, but investigation equipment over the 2-year period, it's about $6,000 each year, and that allows us to buy what we would need to get started. There's $1,000 budgeted for staff training, and then the additional compensation would be less than $5,000 for staff compensation in year 1. So that is the proposal in front of you. So what are we trying to get out of this? Why go to this extreme or not extreme, but why go to this point to start doing our own investigation? One is timeliness and dedication. Today, if we request a fire investigator, we get whoever may or may not be available. It could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be several hours before we get an investigator. That's increasingly frustrating when we've got investigating staff sitting right there that could take care of the task at hand. Another part of that timeliness is, some of you may know, people who experience a fire loss, the first thing that's going to happen from an insurance company, or one of the first things, is they're going to request a copy of the report from the investigating fire agency. And it's simply typically an insurance type thing. It's insurance companies' first stab, is this an accident, or is there something that they need to investigate? And usually, for example, if it is an accident, that claim will be processed much, much quickly. So we feel like if we're handling that program, we can ensure that those reports are completed very, very quickly, very timely, and produce a better product to our customers. We can manage the quality level. We have control over who does our investigations and the training they've got, the certifications that they have, and an improved interaction with law enforcement. I can think of no better relationship between our staff and our police officers, the detectives and that type thing, towards working through resolutions related to fire investigations here at the local level versus whoever may come from county staff. Another outcome of this would be the staff improvement part of that. Our employees are eager to learn new things and to learn things new and develop themselves as employees, and this is an excellent opportunity to do that, especially the level that these gentlemen typically would be, or those that are what I would consider the mid-level managers, and this provides an excellent opportunity for staff development for them. And then the last piece of that is to maintain our external partners. We would continue to maintain partnerships with the county for assistance should we need it. The state, as you've already seen, has some what's referred to as original jurisdiction, but the State Bureau of Investigation and Office of State Fire Marshal are key partners when it comes to fire calls and investigation, especially if it involves a fire fatality. They come in. And then lastly, federal agencies. You typically see federal agencies on fire scenes if it's more of something on a national level. Several years ago, church fires was a big national thing. So anything that involved a fire at a church almost automatically got you a federal agent to assist with that investigation to see if it was something part of a bigger investigation. So that's the program that we requested in a nutshell, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
And what actually prompts a formal fire investigation? For example, I'm assuming a car fire or somebody's burning trash and the fire spreads, you don't have to do an investigation there, do you?
Yes, sir. Pretty much any fire, someone on the scene has to make the determination. That could be as informal as, a vehicle fire sitting beside the road, the car owner says it was smoking under the hood, gives us a story, everything we see confirms it, and the investigation can be that simple. Or it can be very, very intricate, and we're talking a structure fire or something like that. Typically, our threshold, and this may be more what you're asking, our threshold for today for calling outside resources, or in this case, potentially the county, is if our on-scene incident commander can't figure out what caused it. Looks at it and goes, I don't know what happened here. Or if it has a high loss, if there's a significant loss, then that triggers what I would consider, and maybe what you're referring to, as a full investigation where we go through the thing completely. Sure.
So is there a cost when we call in the county to help assist us with these investigations?
There is not.
Okay.
And one thing I failed to mention, I think it may have been on the slide, there's no written agreement of any type with the county. So if they are unable to respond, or there's no formal agreement of all if we use county resources or don't, as far as expectations or what they should do or should not do when they come.
Okay.
Any idea how many fire departments in Wake County have their own fire investigative services?
I would say probably of the municipal fire departments, I would say probably 6 to 8 are using their own investigators of the municipalities.
Chris, define locally. When you were speaking, you said, I forgot exactly how it was, but it implied within the corporate limits. Is locally in the district and in the corporate limits?
So the difference between the municipality and the unincorporated area, the slide that I showed, the first one that showed who has responsibility, in the county areas, there's an additional bullet that says the county fire marshal has some responsibility. What we do today is we use that same trigger. If we can figure out the fire, we know what caused or whatever, then we handle those ourselves internally. But if it's again undetermined or has a high significant loss, then we refer that to the county.
But if it's in the fire district, which is unincorporated.
Unincorporated, yes, sir.
The county takes the lead.
They do today, yes, sir. And
Today under this.
so here's what, under our current contract requires them to take the lead in the unincorporated area we serve. The county is in the draft versions of the contract that we may see next year, they have moved that word to can because they recognize that a lot of municipalities have resources they do not have. And they are willing to give up that responsibility. to one with more abilities.
Well, if they could give it up, it's saving them money.
I would say not, because the people who do their investigations work 24-hour staff shifts, so they've got to maintain those people. It's no cheaper if we don't call them, I guess is would be the way I would explain that.
Okay, well, where I was headed with that is if they don't have to send somebody out here, it saves them money. And if it saves them money, are they giving us consideration for that?
Yeah, it's not saving them any money because it doesn't cost them anything to send someone.
But it could if the count went down significantly, not just here, but everywhere. But for example, and I don't mean to run this in the dirt, it's
Right.
just, a lot of this is just curiosity stuff. But take Wendell, for example, where they do not have a fire department. So everything falls on the county at that
That's
point, is
correct.
that right?
That's correct.
Inside the town and out.
That's correct.
So does their fire department over there, which is, well, really a function of the county, do they take the lead on any of that themselves?
So they're going to take lead on those minor calls. Anything with any level of difficulty at all, they're going to refer that to the county. And for us, I think it's kind of all of those bullets of that expected outcome. It's the quality piece, it's the timeliness. It's kind of, for us, that's what tipped the scales to say maybe we should just do it ourselves.
No, I understand where you're
Sure.
coming from. I'm just, every time that we take something that the county has been doing.
That's right.
Or that someone else has been doing, just like NCDOT on these
Right.
lights, it always makes my bells ring, if
Sure.
you will, like, oh, well, wait a minute, why are we,
And I think most everybody knows my history. That was my employer for many, many years.
Right.
And I think my perspective would be is we got a free ride for many, many years because they didn't have any responsibility to provide that service in the town, but they did it anyway. So I would say that we had a good ride. We had a good free ride for a number of years.
yeah, well, I know they did because I remember one still lawsuit that
Sure.
they got involved in that
Sure.
was a fire inside corporate limits years ago. Okay, well, thank you.
And to make sure I got my numbers right, you're basically asking for roughly $12,000 a year, and naturally it would be ongoing because you'd want to keep this in place.
So that would be for the first 2 years. And then after the first 2 years, that equipment cost would go down considerably because once we buy the equipment. So then you're only looking at the staff costs and training costs.
Okay, so $12,000 a year for the first 2 years, and then ideally maybe drop to $6,000 in year 3.
That is exactly right, yes, sir. The salary piece, quite honestly, is a little bit of a, we got people to get trained, we got to get them certified. And that's, the fire investigator certification is one of the most difficult fire certifications one could obtain. Some people, it takes some years to get the required training and experience to be certified. So that plays into when these gentlemen will be able to start performing the task.
Other questions? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. And I think Chief Hayworth is up next.
Thanks.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and members of the board. Good to see you again. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the hiring of police officers and the process by which we're doing it now and what we have done for the last 20 years and why that's really not working for us. So in the first slide, in the preface, what I'm going to say is that we cannot continue to recruit and hire in the manner that we've always done. I think we all know that one of the things that's said sometimes, well, we've always done it that way, and that's the way we've always done this. Well, we all know that there comes a time then the way we've always done it just doesn't work anymore. And some of the things I'll talk about tonight is one is the competition is too great. And what I mean by that is everyone is hiring. all law enforcement officers or agencies are hiring, and the pool of applicants is small. So lots of hiring going on, small pool to choose from. And then we'll talk about the lag time is too long. And what I mean by lag time, it's the time that it takes us to find an appropriate candidate, then second, to hire that appropriate candidate, and then thirdly, to train that candidate and actually put them to work into a position that we call solo patrol. And what solo patrol means is that this officer is able to work alone by themselves without a sergeant riding with them or a field training officer. The next issue is that our margins, our working margins, are too thin. And what I mean by that is we've talked a lot of times, I've talked to you about staffing, and we've discussed staffing, and we all know that. But when you look at staffing in a particular scenario, you can say, well, that shift is full. And I know that some of you have done ride-alongs, and other ones were going to do a ride-along, and COVID has kind of put that off for a bit, but hopefully you'll do that. And you'll see how a shift can go from a full shift almost immediately to everybody's tied up. And this happened this weekend. I came out and was out for probably 6 hours. Another command staff member came out and was out for several hours, and we had a full shift on. But just one call, all of a sudden, everybody's tied up. And we ended up having to call 2 officers in on that day to come in and work shifts on overtime. So our working margins are thin. So the whole point of this presentation is, the final point on the preface, is that we have to think of new and creative ways to staff our department. So what used to work just simply doesn't work anymore. So to take you into this, we'll talk about the history of hiring. And under the history of hiring, I want to talk about first is we're not really able to remain in this constant state of hiring and recruiting. And what I mean by that constant state, a lot of departments are always hiring and they're always recruiting. And, so they're always in this mode. You see their ads, you see their flyers. If you're especially at community colleges, you'll see their ads on the wall, and you'll see, even sometimes poster boards or street signs that say, we're hiring officers. One of the problems with us is we have limited openings. And in fact, in the last, we average about 2 openings every 3 years. And is about what we average now. And of course, with anticipated growth, as we all know, the town has got this on this cusp of great growth. And at the same time, we have some employees retiring. Most of you was at Dennis Brandon's farewell out here in the driveway. So with retiring people and with growth, we're going to be adding positions. So those, along with the openings that we do have, I think we'll get more as we go along. So the next point here then is that we can't recruit and then not have a position to offer. You can say, what do you mean by that? Well, these departments that are recruiting all the time, they can recruit all the time because they always have a position to offer. We don't. We don't always have a position. So in the state I'm talking about, if it's 2 officers in a 3-year period, then lots of classes go through BLET, lots of people are applying for jobs, in some area in that time frame. And if they aren't applying for a job with us now at the exact same time that we have an opening, then we can't hire them. And twice, on 2 particular occasions that just come to mind, I know there's been more, but 2 that come to mind because they really stood out to me. There were 2 employees 2 applicants that had went through our process. One applicant did an internship with us. Was a recent graduate from ECU, did an internship with us. The other person grew up in the Zebulon area, worked at a farm just outside of town. And both of these employees really wanted to work at Zebulon. And they came and they talked to me several times. We really want to work at Zebulon. It's where I've always wanted to work. And in both of those occasions, when that employee, or when that applicant, was ready to be hired, we didn't have an opening. And I said, I'm sorry, I wish we had something open. We don't have anything open. And even for a while, one of these people, we hired them part-time to fill in our front desk position right after Horace Barnes retired for the second time. And, we were trying to stretch this person along so we could have an opening to hire them, but we didn't. So both of these employees went to work at other departments. And particularly the one employee, I called him up and I said, look, we have an opening coming up. I'd really love for you to consider coming back. And he said, well, look, I'd love to come to Zebulon, that's where I always wanted to work, but now I've bought a house in this other community. My wife has a job in this other community. My daughter's in school here, and I just can't do that. So that's the problem when we're trying to recruit people, and I'll talk about that a bit more. So what happens is under B is we get recruits in really one of two ways. One way is they're referred to us by a current employee. And right now, we're in the process of considering an applicant who's going through our steps, who happened to graduate high school with Jordan Perry at Heritage Baptist Church School here in Zebulon. And this young man went to work for another department, kind of away from here, right when he graduated high school, and he wants to get back close to home. So he's applying because he said, Jordan Perry said, hey, this is a great place to work. You should come work for us. And so this young man has applied for our apartment. Second thing is walk-ins. And this used to be a regular occurrence. If you talk to the people that work our front desk, we used to always have people coming at our front desk and saying, are you hiring? I want to pick up an application. We rarely see that anymore. And in fact, the last time that I really know of this happening was about 3 years ago. We hired Chris Ham. And Chris Ham came to us like that. He walked in the door and said, hey, I want to move to this area. He lived a little far away from here, and he said, I want to get back. My wife's from this area. I want to come back to work here. And we hired him, and he had just walked in our door. The third thing that we do right now is that we currently focus on candidates that have BLET certification. And as most of you probably know, that's basic law enforcement training, that certification. And so we're hiring people that already meet all the criteria to start to work. And when we find that, it's right now, that pool is a highly recruited pool, because now you've had the academy, you've got the training, and recruiters from all over the area are going to these BLETs, and they're talking to these places, and they're trying to recruit people while they're in BLET. So it's a highly recruited pool, and oftentimes by the end of the academy, by the end of BLET, we find that there's not many folks available. So then, once we find an applicant, and a person has came to Zebulon and they've expressed interest in getting on a Zebulon PD, then we have the hiring process. And the hiring process itself takes about 3 months. So all of a sudden we have an opening, a person comes and they say, Chief, I'm moving, I'm doing this or that, and I know I'm going to have an opening. We start looking for somebody, we find an applicant, and then we begin the background investigation. There's a whole long list of things that take place in this 3 months. We just simply can't hire a person off the street. We have to do, there's a form called an F8 that's required by the state. It's a very lengthy form. We have to fill that form out. We have to go to the places where they lived. We have to get driving records, criminal histories, all kinds of things that we have to do. We have to do a lie detector test. We have to do a psychological test. So all these steps we have to go to, and these steps take about 3 months once that suitable candidate starts in the process. And then we move to B. We hire them. They've moved. We found the employee that we want. We've moved them through the process for 3 months, and now we hire them. Now we've got approximately another 3 weeks, once we hire them, 3 weeks to a month, before we can get them certified. We have to take them out to the range. They have to qualify at the range. We send their paperwork into Training and Standards, and then Training and Standards does a background, some other things, and then they get back up with us eventually, and they say, look, this person's good to go. They email us a certification, then we swear that employee in. So now the person's paperwork is here from Training and Standards, and the next thing we have is then a FTO program, or field training program. Our average field training program is 14 weeks. And I say average because if a person came to us from another department and had some basic training, it may only take them 12 weeks or 13 weeks. Sometimes people just, it's a little harder for them to grasp some of the concepts, and they may not quite get it in 14 weeks. and it may take 15 or 16 weeks. So the average for that is 14 weeks. So from the starting the process, once we start the process to that solo patrol point is generally 8 months. That's after we find the person and we're ready to go. And then 2 years. It takes a police officer about 2 years to grasp their job, even though they're working on their own, because of the nature of our business and because that at times we have to be counselors and we have to be lawyers and we have to be security and we have to be all these different roles that the officer has to play, and they'll run into scenarios that they've never had before. And so about 2 years is what we think is the average amount of time before an officer really is comfortable in their position. So all that leads up to this dilemma. And the dilemma really is in the fact, I've mentioned, a good economy pushes prospective employees to the private sector. And so everybody knows that you're not going to get rich in law enforcement. It's just not it. It's not, IBM or one of these kind of places that you can go and you can expect to make this big amount of money. Whitley Gallery, some of those places, that people went. Just but in actuality, what happens in law enforcement, we find good applicants and they want to come work for us, and then they get offered a job in the private sector. I know people who work in security for Glaxo and work in security for other companies or banks and these big high-rolling places, companies, and they make a lot more money. And so they'll sometimes, in a good economy, I know our economy right now is kind of in a weak lull because of COVID, but our economy was pretty good before that, and jobs were good, houses were being built, all this was happening, and so I think it's going to go back to that, and our employees then are looking in the private sector. Also, there's a perception that there's a reduction in governmental business or governmental employee benefits, that the government, 33 years ago when I started, it was a common thing. Everybody said, hey, you go work for the government, they got great benefits, you're gonna have great thing. Well, now they're seeing that whether it's true or not, and in some circumstances maybe it is, but that's the perception, that's what we're hearing. And indeed, good applicants are being hired prior or during BLET. So that pool of applicants that I talked to you about a slide or so ago, that pool all of a sudden begins to dwindle even more, because those recruiters that are going to BLET are hiring the people while they're in BLET. Or when that person comes and knocks on their door and says, I really want to work at your department, they're hiring them at that point and sending them to BLET. So that pool begins to dwindle. So the BLET, I've mentioned it a few times, and I just wanted to put a point out there to you that BLET itself is lengthy. So if we look at the way we're doing it now, and we find an employee, we really want them to work for us, either they already have to have BLET, or we wait until they graduate BLET. Problem with that is that BLET is 3 to 9 months long. And the reason why it's that 3 to 9 months is if they go full-time in the daytime, every day, and then I think it's like every other Saturday, it's about 3 months for them to go through it. If they go in the night BLET, so if they're employed somewhere and they're going to school part-time in BLET, they have to go at night, it takes about 9 months for that. And generally they go every night from like 6 p.m. to 9 or 10 p.m. and then they go on Saturdays, usually for 6 to 8 hours on Saturdays. So it takes a long time for that employee to get to BLET. So for us to wait somebody out and hope that they don't get hired, sometimes that makes it difficult to do that. So this continued. All these previous points equate that it's difficult to obtain a sufficient number of qualified applicants. So we're just not seeing that pool there. And as I was having a conversation with somebody today, and we said, well, they just aren't there. The applicants aren't there, this big pool. And that's just not only a Zebulon problem. It's not just because it's Zebulon. I've recently talked to RPD. RPD has 48 openings. The North Carolina Highway Patrol has 200 openings. I mean, and years ago, you never heard of the Highway Patrol having an opening. I mean, it's just pretty much, there was a line, a list. If you wanted to get on the Highway Patrol, you knew that you were going to be on a waiting list for a year to be considered. and now they have 200 openings. Nearly every police department that we talk to, nearly every police chief that I talk to, they say they have openings, or they're anticipating openings coming up very shortly. So what's the solution to this? As I said when I really began this presentation, is that we have to start thinking of different ways to do it. And that's what we do. We think of different ways to do it. Meetings have been troubled by COVID, so now we're doing meetings on Teams, or we're doing meetings on Zoom, and we're doing meetings with people standing out in the hallway. We're doing all these things because we're adapting. Well, that's what we have to do with our hiring solution. We have to adapt to the applicants and the candidates and the situation that are available to us. How do I think we do that? One is that we invest in applicants prior to and during BLET for sponsorships. One thing that we have in the budget this year is a scholarship program. Every BLET in this area, they run a day school and a night school. And now, I understand this, just because a person goes to BLET, doesn't mean they're going to pass, because a lot of times people don't pass. Secondly, it doesn't mean that person is going to be hired. Doesn't even mean they're qualified to be hired, because the BLET programs are ran by the community college system. A person actually doesn't have to meet all the requirements to be a police officer and be in BLET. In fact, it wasn't too many years ago that Wendell Police Department arrested a person in BLET on a warrant. The person was in BLET and had a warrant on them out of Wendell. So it doesn't automatically mean, just because they're in BLET, that this person's hireable. But what we want to be able to do is look at applicants who want to go to BLET, but maybe just can't quite get there. Maybe they can't quite afford it, and we can invest a little bit of money into them in a scholarship program along the line of uniforms or PT clothes, some very, very small investment that we can get people into BLET in exchange for a commitment contract. And I'll mention that in just a minute as I bring something else in. Because under C, we also want to consider hiring top candidates and putting them through BLET in exchange for a longer commitment contract. And what I mean by commitment contract is, under a scholarship program, they would sign a commitment saying that once they graduate BLET for a small investment, they're committing that they will come to work for Zebulon for a minimum of 2 years. And if they don't, if they go somewhere else, or something else happened, then that person on that contract, they refund us the amount of money that we put into them. We're not the only department that does this. We're not the only ones that's ever done it. There's departments doing this in many, many situations. The commitment contract in exchange for a BLET, that we hire them, send them to BLET, we're looking at that commitment contract being longer. Maybe that commitment contract is 3 years, and obviously the commitment is more. So we're investing into this applicant. When we invest into them up front, now we have a little better control over their BLET. We get their scores. They call us. They say, this person's kind of weak in this area. We can call that applicant up and say, hey, we're sponsoring you. You're working with us, and you've got to pick it up a little bit. Or maybe you're being late for class and you're about to get kicked out. You've got to get involved just a little bit more. So it gives us that, and it also establishes loyalty. I talked to the BLET director at Wake Tech, and he told me that investing in a BLET candidate before they go to BLET or while they're in instills loyalty. And his name's John Gregory. He personally told me that he has seen agencies come into that BLET and offer somebody a job, and that person, at a well-paid department, and that person says, no, I'm loyal to this department. This department sponsored me. They're putting me through BLET, so I am going to give them whatever commitment they have or whatever commitment that they believe they have. So it instills loyalty. And in fact, we're not the only ones doing this. Our fire department is kind of resorting to the same thing. I know that Chris Perry talked to you a while back about that, and he's here. But the fire department has recently, they begin to see that sometimes they can't hire a firefighter that has all the certifications and all the things that they need prior to hiring this firefighter. So they said, maybe we hire somebody that doesn't quite have them all, and we give them a potential time to finish those certifications. So kind of has to work a little different with us, because you can't actually start as a sworn police officer unless you have the certifications. But it's the same general idea, that we're actually extending something to somebody, establishing loyalty, and getting a commitment out of them. So my final point in the presentation, D, goes right back to the very first point that I began to make, that constant state of recruitment. That's where I would like to be, that we can be recruiting all the time, that we can go to job fairs. We're invited all the time to job fairs, but a lot of times I'll say, why are we going to send somebody to a job fair when we don't have an opening? You know, somebody says, yeah, I really want to come to work for you. Well, sorry, we're here at the job fair, but we don't have any openings, so, you know, it was nice talking to you. Advertisements we can actually put out. Years and years ago, we did a flyer, an advertisement. It was very successful, but it's been a long time since we've done that. The Triangle J. We have entered an agreement with Triangle J as far as recruiting across North Carolina. And so we've put our name in with them, and we're in on that. And I believe that Commissioner Laux, I think, had even some interest or had talked to Triangle J about that. So we're in on that, but at the same time, unless we have an opening when somebody comes to us, we can't hire them. So that constant state of recruitment, I think we get there, and when we do that, we can maximize our staffing. And the last statement I have on there says pre or anticipatory hiring. And what I mean by that is pre-hiring, that's looking at people either before they go to BLET or while they're in some form of BLET. Now that all depends upon the candidate, what they have to offer, you know, how this candidate looks to us. And then secondly, anticipatory hiring. We see an employee come down the pike or somebody comes down, this person is, we know, this person right here is going to be an awesome hire. They meet all these criterias, they meet everything that we need, this person's attitude, personality, their history, everything is great. We really want to hire this person, but we don't have an opening today. That in some circumstances, now this isn't an everyday thing, this isn't something we're gonna constantly do, but in some limited circumstances, this anticipatory hiring is maybe hiring a person that we don't have an opening for, because we're anticipating an opening coming up. Right now, I know of an officer that plans on retiring in November, and I know that. So thinking ahead in an anticipatory case, I could be ready and have all of this ball already rolling and not be behind the 8 ball all the time trying to catch up with that. So that's the idea behind this presentation. The idea is we have to do things differently. And I bring that to you with some possible solutions. Is this the absolute answer to all the problems forever? I don't know. But I think it's a step in the right direction. It's doing things and like I said, trying to think outside the box and try to be creative in the way we look at hiring people. Does anybody have any questions? I'll be happy to answer anything that you have. Yes, sir.
Good presentation. I think you've nailed it on the head. And I've talked to a lot of people about how we could do a better job here. And one of the ideas that comes up is 45 years ago, it was almost a mandatory requirement that police officers live in the city limits for rapid response. And now it's hard to find a small department that anybody even lives in town, which that means they drive their car to their home, which is wear and tear on the vehicle, which is additional gas expense, and technically they should be W-2'd on that because it's considered compensation. So one of the ideas that's come up is rather than having officers do that, and we're already paying somewhere between $3,000 and $6,000 a year per vehicle for that commute, why not consider some type of a housing allotment? So if we did recruit somebody and we would say, if you live in the city limits, in lieu of you taking the car home, we may be able to pay up to $3,000 or $4,000 a year as a bonus or a stipend for them to live in town that they could use to pay rent or house payment, which I think for some people would be a real enticement.
That it absolutely is, is a great idea that we could look at and think about, because it's, the take-home car program is a whole nother thing. It's a recruiting tool in itself, because departments, there's people that live that work in Wake Forest that live in Zebulon and drive their cars home in Zebulon, people that work in Lewisburg that live in Zebulon. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen to that. But it definitely is something that we can consider. I like the idea when we look at incentives, again, that's thinking outside the box. And that's where we're trying to go with this. This isn't all of the outside of the box thinking we could possibly do, but this is a kind of a step in that direction. And other ways to think outside the box, like you're talking about, is absolutely good ideas.
Tim, I would assume that pre-qualification on a scholarship would mean that they could be hired, that you wouldn't wait until the end and find out you got a problem after we put them through school.
That's a great point, Mayor. And yes, we do. When somebody, if we're going to consider somebody to hire them or even to sponsor them, and even the lowest level sponsorship that we can give to somebody, they have to have a background investigation. We do a partial background. Now, we may not, do every little nook and cranny that we're going to do, and there's certain things that we can't do because we have to give them a job offer before we can do, like drug screens and physicals and psychologicals. But yes, we do reach out there and we do a background. We're going to know that this person, before we offer them that sponsorship, we're going to know they don't have a warrant on them. We're going to know they haven't had a DWI last week. And we're going to know those sorts of things. So that's a great point. And yes, we do make sure that we take a good look at them.
Do you think that there is the potential for what I will call a buyout hazard? That person is in BLET, they're approached by the other agency, and they say, no, I've committed to pay back, I have to pay back this money to Zebulon if I don't go to work there. And they say, oh, we'll pay it back for you, and then bring you over here at a higher salary. Do you think there's a risk in that?
There is a risk in that. And I mean, we don't see that a lot. I haven't seen that in local law enforcement officers. But just to give you an example, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a law that if you hire a trooper, a state trooper, within a certain window of time after they're hired and they go through the Highway Patrol Academy, your local government or your agency has to pay the Highway Patrol, and I believe it's $25,000 if you hire them.
So they recognize the risk as well.
So yeah, they could, maybe we could pass that ordinance in Zebulon.
Well,
Yes.
one last question. It just seems to me, I guess it old thinking in my mind, that a lot of your recruits were coming out of the military. Is that still the case?
Not as much as it used to be. We used to get a lot of recruits out of the military. We seem to get a lot here lately from like ECU. We've had some military ECU, and we've had this. Most of our recent recruits are from here. It's somebody who either grew up here, they grew up in Pilot, or they grew up in Bunn, or somewhere like, or their grandmother lived here, and they have this connection to Zebulon. And that's why they come here and they say, hey, this is the place I want to work.
I just didn't know if the military was still a good resource, and then I don't have a clue how you would get inside to recruit.
It is a good resource when you get somebody, and we've hired people that came to us. Heath White, when we hired him, he was actually still in the military at the time, and the first time he ever came and talked to me. But again, he's from Zebulon. He went to East Wake High School, and he has that connection. Military is a highly recruited group of individuals. In fact, as you all know, I worked for Fayetteville PD at one time, and a huge number, probably 80% of their new hires are military folks. So it's a big, and when you hire somebody that's in the military, a lot of times you get somebody that's already structured. They already understand chain of command. They already understand a lot of those sorts of things, keeping their car neat, their uniform neat. They know all of that ahead of time. So they're good hires quite often.
That's all
I think you had another question?
Yeah, what's the approximate tuition or expense to do BLET?
It's about $1,700.
17?
And the reason why is because if we sponsor them, then their tuition is waived. Because the local community college waives the tuition for public safety. So a firefighter or a police officer in the community college program, tuition is waived. So we don't have to pay that. Once we sponsor them, I sign a form, that's a sponsorship form, and the tuition is waived. So then what we're paying for is uniforms, books, and certain things like that.
Other questions?
Any thought process about maybe looking at folks that's retiring from other law enforcement agencies or local or state agencies that's already criminal justice certified, like parole officers that may be retiring, or community police, community policing individuals that could be looking to supplement their retirement or go into a second career?
That's a good question too, sir. And in some cases, those people are good applicants and are good candidates to look at. There is a particular set of standards that the police departments have through training and standards that maybe like somebody, let's say, was a prison guard at a prison. They've had their corrections academy, but they still would have to take the BLET program because those programs right now don't transfer. We are looking at doing more and more of that. In fact, kind of to touch on the mayor's question a minute ago, there is now a military police to BLET, where if you're a military police officer, you can get 380 hours credit towards your BLET. So that's a little more than half. And there are people that want to come out because if you retire, if a person retires from, now if they retire from local government, so if they retire from Wendell Police Department or the Wake County Sheriff's Office, they could not come to work for Zebulon full time in the same retirement system. So they have to come to us from the state. And, but that is actually a pool that we look at and certainly would consider that as another way of thinking outside the box.
Other questions? Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Okay, we'll pick up where I left off, and we were going to talk to you about the fleet. I'm actually going to talk to you less about specifics of the fleet budget and more about the process, and talk to you about the rationale about why I'm proposing what I'm going to propose you all to consider. In order to do that, I need to give you a little bit of backstory because this is factoring largely into the fleet budget story. You saw this presentation in your pre-budget work session where we told you about the composite of your property tax. You've got, well, back in 2009, you had about $400 million worth of real property value. That's the value of land and buildings. And then you had about another $400 million in personal property. So that's the value of equipment and vehicles. And we saw from 2009 to 2010, real property bumped up because you had just completed a revaluation, but then after 2011 to 2012, 2013, 14, so on and so forth, while the real property pretty much stayed flat because there wasn't a revaluation, thankfully, because the housing market had crashed, you saw a real retraction in the personal property value because a lot of businesses, a lot of big businesses that are in your corporate limits that have very expensive equipment stopped investing in that equipment. And so the value of their personal property devalued rather quickly. And then things started to rebound in 2016 as you started to see the economy improve, as you started to see more developments occur. You started to see some big upticks in personal property, most notably as that big facility that doesn't employ many people out at BB&T. So this area right in here is what I want to focus on that tells a lot, not only about fleet, but about some other things that are going on. So we talked about this as well during your pre-budget work session, that there was a dip in the value of property, and the scales of this graph probably don't really tell the full story because I'm superimposing two different rates here. But effectively, you had a reduction of close to $100 million worth of property value between 2010 and 2013. Superimposed upon that, there was a reduction in the property tax rate, and then that property tax rate stayed flat up till 2012 while the property value declined. And so the net result was less revenue came into this organization to provide the services. So between 2009 and 2010, there was an aggregate gain because while there was a drop in the property tax rate, there was a little bit of an increase in property value, but thereafter there was aggregate losses, so 138,000 loss. The next year, an additional 149,000, so 138 coupled with the 149, and then an additional 17,000 for that last year. So what that did is that resulted in a climate and an operation that has been referred to you and has been referred to me since I got here about this notion of doing more with less. And my first budget that I presented to the board was actually the FY17 budget. So much like I did this year, per statute, I have to compare the previous year with the previous year with the proposed year. And so I went back and looked at my slides, and it was good to go through that because I think it provides you with some good information. So the FY16 recommended budget reflected, the operating piece reflected full-time employees of, and I'm looking roughly at the scale, but it looks like it was like 58 employees. But what it didn't tell you is what was going on in the subsequent years. So as the economy was crashing, there was a couple of things that were going on that probably weren't the most advantageous. One was we dropped the property tax rate, so we brought in less revenue, and then we compounded the problem by bringing more people on. So what we're doing is we're bringing in less revenue and we're expanding services. And so that created a real particular problem that I'm going to highlight. So we kept on adding people, and one of the things that happens when you add people as your revenue is dropping is you have to get that money from somewhere. So you start taking money away from the existing employees. And so what the existing employees experienced was no salary increases, reduction and elimination in training. And so the result was you stopped reinvesting in your employees. And that reinvestment also includes stopped reinvesting in streets, stopped reinvesting in fleet. And then when the music stopped, so to speak, where we had to make a dramatic adjustment rather than just keeping things even keeled, we had gotten used to providing more services with more people, and now all of a sudden those positions were gone, and some of the things that we should have been doing otherwise got loaded onto particular positions. And this was most pronounced probably in the clerk's position, where a lot of duties were assigned to one person. But you can see this with other positions throughout the organization. Planning had a couple of examples of this as well. And so in the FY17 budget that I proposed to you, that's why we started focusing on bringing back some of the positions that got dropped, as well as changing some of the positions. This couple that I want to highlight on is this administrative assistant. That what we were trying to do was start to pull away some duties away from the clerk, and we thought we could do that through part-time help. We found out that that was difficult to find someone who could and would want to work part-time. But that was good lessons learned, because we eventually moved forward with a full-time position, and that was Stacy Paratori, who's now the deputy clerk. And so that's a position waiting. And then subsequently, the IT specialist came in. So we've done some things since this budget to remedy this overloading and this lack of reinvestment in the personnel. But the lack of reinvestment also went into other areas, such as streets and the fleet. From that budget presentation for the FY17 budget, the things that were relayed at the budget presentation was a carryover of what we had talked about at the retreat from a few months before. So that would have been at Rose Hill, and what we shared with the board is that deferred maintenance is costly. So Chris Ray talked about this a little bit, but when you have streets that are in this category, this 90 to 95, I'm trying to remember what the grades were. If if you repave a street, if you can repave it within that time frame of the 5 to 10 year, then you're paying what was 65 cents a square yard. If you push out the resurfacing, the condition of the road gets worse, and so now you're into the $20 a square yard to repair something. So we really want to stay in this area right here about getting, reinvesting in streets, and that's one of the things that we relayed to the board back in the 2017 budget. So deferred maintenance is costly. Deferred maintenance also compounds, so this is another thing that Chris was referring to in 2013. This is the percentage of excellent streets that you had. This is the percentage of poor streets. As you continue, or if you don't reinvest, what happens is the number of excellent streets declines, the number of poor streets increases. And so as the can gets kicked down the road, theoretically, the compounded needs soon become insurmountable, because what it will cost to repair the roads, in this example in 2016, are much more expensive in a later year if you don't address it. So that's a reinvestment example as it relates to streets. Now, more pressing, because you'll see, and I'll point out to you a couple of places in the budget, the more pressing need, while Chris and the Streets and Thoroughfare Committee made a recommendation that they would like to see $500,000, and this budget has $320,000 actually to go towards streets. And I feel confident, especially as we're charging more for impact fees and we're charging a motor tag fee, we'll get more revenue. The fleet is a much different situation. It's much more imbalanced. One of the things that we talked about in the 2017 is similar to what we talked about with streets, that deferred replacement equals costly repairs. Example here is similar to the street example. When you replace a vehicle with 3 years or 36,000 miles or less, it's in excellent condition. Annual cost at that time was a little over $1,000 a year. When you let it slip to 3 to 5 years or under 49,000, it starts to increase. And this is very noticeable in police cruisers, because they very much use those cars. Those are like mobile offices. Once they get past this 5 year, you start to really get into very expensive repairs. So similar storyline to what we talked about with the street reinvestment. So deferred replacements, once again, they compound, similar story. If you put in the money early, then you retain the number of excellent vehicles. If you defer, then the number of fair vehicles multiplies and compounds. And the problem with that is not only are they costly repairs, but they result in being out of service repairs. One of the things that started to happen in Zebulon is we started taking out more and more loans, which for a big vehicle like a ladder, a fire ladder, or a fire engine, there's no other way to do it. It's just too expensive. But when you start doing it for more routine basis, it starts to mount up and compound on you, much like a credit card. And the loans that we were seeing for short-term common pieces were starting to overlap. And so we saw that. We were in a cycle of loan upon loan upon loan. And one of the good things that we've accomplished since 2017 is we've retired a lot of this debt. One of the things that we did that I think is a good thing is we didn't get used to those payments. We didn't roll that right back into the operating budget. We kept it in the capital budget. And so when we had really tough times that we're about coming into, we now have these loan payments that we were making available to us. So we've closed out all but that municipal complex is going to be with us a while, for another 9 years at least. We got one coming up within a couple years on the building maintenance, and then we've retired a lot of debt. So that's the good story there. But it illustrates the point that we were getting into a cycle of loan upon loan upon loan. Now the budget message, this was before you had a strategic plan, and so without a strategic plan which lacks visions and lacks goals, the only goal that I could really come up with was come up with something which is to control costs. And so the goal number one of that budget message back in would have been the year 2016 for the 2017 budget, was just to control our investments, manage our streets, manage our fleet so those costs don't control us. but also invest in things that are going to maybe start making us money. Make some investments in the downtown overlay district so you can see some some buildings turn over, get some uses in them so you can increase your sales tax revenue, but increase the value of those buildings so you can get some increases in your property tax revenue. Become a walkable community, meaning connect different parts of the community, so connect residential areas with commercial areas, as you've seen with your the Arundel sidewalks, but also connect communities to each other with other resources, because greenways, as an example, they'll increase the resale value, so that in turn increases the property tax value of residential structures. So those are the two goals of the budget that was presented to you. As it related to that second feature, which is reinvest in the fleet so we can manage our costs, what was presented at the time was that we wanted to get out of the red zone, we wanted to spend less on maintenance, we wanted to maintain service reliability, so specifically when an officer went to use a vehicle, he wasn't hoping that it was going to start that time. We wanted to even out the spending, so we weren't putting in these big slugs for replacement. We just wanted to have an even keel, like a certain amount of money to invest each year in our vehicles. And to do that, to buy some time to grow the purchase power and buy some time to structure loans. So what buying the time is, just hold on to that thought and I'll explain it in a minute. So what we put forth in the budget for FY 2017 is just, we had a lot of vehicles out in the lot all around here that just didn't run. And we were scared to get rid of them because we didn't know when we would get another vehicle. So we just sold all of them. Didn't get a lot of money for them, but at least we got rid of some dead weight. We used $100,000 of general fund balance for fleet maintenance, and we dedicated 2% of a property tax. So I'll just go back close to 5 years. I was the guy who came in and recommended a 5-cent property tax increase and close to a drawdown of $1 million in general fund balance. I was a very popular person at that time. But the idea being, well, I got to go back, sorry. This 2 cents, at that time, a cent would pull in about 80,000, so this was going to be a dedication of 160,000. Right now, a cent, and Bobby can correct me, but it's around 130. Okay, I get the head nod, so I'm cool on that. So we knew that the property tax base was going to grow, and so this dedicated 2 cents, the value that came from that was going to grow as well. So we knew that we had some general fund balance, but we also knew that the property tax was going to grow. So one of the things that I do, and you've picked up on this, is in your budget, close to 500 pages, there is a requested budget. And what I do is I get all of the department directors that have a stake in that particular area, put them in the room, they have a budget, and they've got to work it out. And there's a reason for that. This organization was very much siloed. Still got some work to do, but very much siloed. Like every department came and just talked to the manager and submitted a request without any knowledge about what other department needs were. So by putting them all in the same room, they get to understand and maybe empathize with what other departments need, and that allows them to get creative. And so we've seen some very good examples in different capital budgets how these different department heads have come together, work within a budget, come up with creative ways to satisfy mutual goals or a couple of goals. The exception of fleet is proving to be more and more difficult, and so that's why I've taken the ball and making this presentation. So if you go to your, if you look in your budget book, and if you look at the requested CIP section, and you look specifically at the section that is related to the fleet, and the page that I'm looking at, I used to not have to need glasses, but I need them now. F59. So that's the section of the budget that I'm looking at. If you look at this, and you look at that first column, of all the things that they felt that were the highest priority, they came up with what totals over $750,000. Okay, that 2 cents dedicated tax revenue is not going to touch that. Nowhere close. Part of the problem is they were given in hindsight is an impossible challenge. One is there's too many mixed priorities here, and so we're going to have to rethink about for next budget year how we approach the fleet. We can't put all types of vehicles into one pool of money and expect us to come up with priorities. And the reason for that is, I'll break this down. So this is just a digested version. This chart right here is a digested version of what's in this bigger fold out here. So the items I've got listed here are not going to be in exactly the order, and I've kind of just cherry-picked a few to make a point. These red ones, these are large pieces of equipment. These are pieces of equipment that will last us 10 to 25 years. Massive pieces of equipment. The ladder truck, as an example, that's $1.2 million. That needs to last us between 25, no more than 30 years. The fire pumpers, we've got a series of those in here that we're going to be replacing on 8-year cycles. In fact, we've got one that's going to come up on a 6-year cycle because we weren't structuring things out like we used to. But those are examples of very big pieces of equipment. You're not going to have the cash. You don't want to spend cash on those pieces of equipment. The what I'll call the medium equipment are those, so I'm talking about these things right here. They really are equipment. Those are going to be your backhoes. Those are going to be your tampers. That's not going to be rolling stock. And the life cycle cost for a piece of equipment that's not rolling stock is going to be a different category than what is going to be the life cycle replacement for a rolling vehicle. So that's another mismatch there. We're lumping in apples and oranges and cherries in this. The other category is police vehicles. So police vehicles, while they may be similar to the vehicles in what I'm calling the other vehicles, they are treated much more differently. They are driven very hard. They are mobile offices. They are used constantly. 4 years, they are tapped out. These vehicles up here, they might be used for going to a job site. They might be used for going to a meeting in downtown Raleigh, but they're going to be used differently, and they're going to have different wear and tear. So one of the things that we need to do is we need some time to better prioritize and categorize all these things that we've lumped into this one set that we're calling Fleet Capital Committee. The other thing that we're taking the time to look at is for either this set of vehicles, the other vehicles, or this set of vehicles, the police vehicles. We are investigating a program that's run by Enterprise Rental Car, and whether we go with them or we create something similar, the idea being is go ahead and invest a certain amount every year and replace either these vehicles or these vehicles on a set cycle so that you can get the biggest return on your resale. Don't own them for 10 years and get no resale value. Be intentional about replacing them every 4 years to get some resale value and keep the cycle going. So we want to investigate the idea of using either enterprise or an enterprise type of program, and we're not ready to make that recommendation. The other thing is, I think we have presented to you a conservative budget. I think that our property tax base offers us some insurance. In fact, in the current fiscal year, I think your property tax base is going to give you some cover where you're going to see some shortfalls in sales tax revenue. All that said, we don't know. We don't know what the future holds. And so one of the things I like about taking this time to take the time to recategorize and understand how to prioritize which really are the most pressing needs of these vehicles. Also to take the time to see if of contracting with enterprise or creating an enterprise program is taking that time to evaluate those ideas is going to allow us to hold on to some cash. So if we need to use it, we've got it. And then, let me go back again. So the last thing to point out, as big as this book is, the most important part, and the only actionable item is under the budget message, that section that starts with A2 and goes to A6. That's this section right here. As big as this book is, this is the only thing that you're going to vote on and have a public hearing on Monday night. And so this is it. This is the budget that you vote on. And what we've got in here is, if you look at page A3, for each department, there's a, not for each department, some don't have it, but there's an operating budget and then there's a capital budget. What we've done is in some of these departments, planning being an example, public works being an example, police being another example, fire, is in the capital section, we've put in some money just as placeholders for fleet replacement. What I will have to do as your manager is when we decide how much we're going to pull out of this, I'm going to have to come before you with a budget adjustment when we get an idea of how to prioritize these things and whether we enter into a contract with enterprise or create an enterprise program, and also have a better idea of what our FY21 revenue looks like. So we don't have a recommendation for you on the fleet other than that we want to take some more time on it. We're reserving some items within the budget ordinance that I just pointed out. And before I finish up with your formal presentations for tonight, I'll just see if you've got any questions on our approach to the fleet.
Question?
It looks a little bit like if you're looking at 59, F59, is that right? Yeah. That even though you're talking about needing to replace things like the police cruisers on a more vigorous schedule, we're still at, from this, we're out at 2025 replacing 7-year-old vehicles. Is that just because we're trying to catch up? Or are we going to be trying to move to, I mean, I understand that we're still thinking about this enterprise possibility, but it doesn't seem like this is moving towards reducing the amount of time between replacing vehicles.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on there. If you go a little bit deeper, if you look at F69, that's the committee's attempt at this enterprise program. So the replacement cycle is less. The one thing that I don't like about this is we're still mixing apples and oranges and cherries. I'd much rather have like an enterprise program for police, as an example, police cruisers. And while this spreadsheet does get too far out, that's not our goal. Our goal is, if we're going to do an enterprise, we've got to be replacing every 4 years. So this is just a first step. It's not the intent.
Okay.
And I don't know if I answered your question or not. Okay.
Other questions? Joe, the one I have is a curiosity thing. Just looking at the police vehicles, does that include the upfit of those vehicles? So if you went with an enterprise, or even if we buy a new one, I know sometimes the equipment can't be moved over, it's outdated or whatever the case. What is our situation with that?
Yeah, so that's one of the unknown. While the enterprise program in theory sounds enticing, it's just a theory. And so we're really getting into the nuts and bolts. When you look at the specifics, the idea of replacing a police cruiser becomes problematic for the very reason that you just talked about. Replacing a planning vehicle, even replacing a public works vehicle, becomes much more manageable because they're driving a vehicle that can get parlayed into the free market pretty easily. The police cruisers that our line officers are using, it gets problematic for the reason. Now, I will say that there are vehicles that police are using by our command staff that have a little bit less manipulation to it. But your question is an exact reason about why we need to spend some time on the details of this, because in theory it sounds great, but it's all whether it will work or not.
Well, my assumption is that I have been on the fire trucks in years past because I was on the fire department a long time ago. But if, for example, in public works, basically you have to put a emblem on the side and a radio in it. Is that about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not much more complicated than that. It's certainly not as complicated as a police cruiser.
Oh, I know it's not like as a police, but I don't know what they have on them, so I didn't know if the radios were installed, if they used handhelds, or I just didn't know how they did it.
Yeah. The other thing is, we even saw this with fire truck. Fire truck, public works vehicles, they've got, while they may not be picked up on, because none of us are going to go buy a fire engine, they can be picked up by other organizations. Police cruisers are cooked. They're just done.
Well, a police cruiser is like the little old lady that's selling her car that only has 500 miles on it, but all 500 were put on in the Daytona 500.
There you go.
So
I like that.
well
I like
shot.
that.
But anyway, thank you.
All right, any other? Okay. All right, so you've completed 3 steps of the budget process. Your next one, June 22nd, you'll have your budget ordinance public hearing. That night, you'll be in a position, if you so choose, to adopt the budget ordinance. If you want to table it and make a decision at a later date, you can do that, just as long as it's no later than July 1st. So you would have to schedule a meeting on or before June 30th. And that marks our prepared presentations for tonight. I'll check in with the clerk to see if she received any public input. So Mayor, that once again concludes our formal presentation for tonight.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're going to, proposing to go into a closed session as permitted by North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A6 for the purpose of personnel discussions. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Made and second. All in favor? Thank you. We'll take a short break beforehand in case anybody needs it.